I think politicians can meet that threat with regulation.
You think Warren is generally right?
No, I think Mark's right.
Okay, Mark.
Can they? I'm not sure that they can.
And I think it's reasonable for a guy who's made $50–60 billion.
You have to learn how to invest, which is to put money into the things you care about and then do nothing.
Some people are not actually emotionally or psychologically fit to own stocks, but I think more of them would be if you get educated on what you're really buying, which is part of a business.
And learning that second part is super hard. Can I tell you something about Bitcoin, which is so important? So I think Bitcoin is very important because it just shows the fragility of, the traditional financial infrastructure.
Now, the argument will be that Bitcoin will reach $100,000. It could reach $500,000, or it could be down to $5,000. We don't know.
If you just look at the quantity and the size of like the M2 money supply as an example, the real question that I think people should be asking ourselves is, okay, if Bitcoin becomes a de facto reserve currency that basically displaces gold, what replaces the US dollar? And here's where, if you want to just bear with me for a second, it's not Bitcoin that replaces the US dollar. It is a stable coin. And what does all of that mean? In less fancy language, there are companies around the world that are replacing one fixed US dollar with one digital token of a US dollar. And by simply making that small abstraction, they're able to completely build financial rails that didn't exist. On-ramps and off-ramps to trading, to asset management, to banking, to payments processing. There's a revolution happening. It's not felt as much in the United States because people don't see it because the financial services infrastructure is so robust. But when you look at the developing world, and if you look in any market where there is any form of currency manipulation or currency instability, that's the future. And so, Bitcoin is a canary in a coal mine for a completely virtual, largely anonymous, and we can debate whether that's good or not, financial reality. And so, I think that it's a very important trend that's worth understanding. The other thing is, so many of the dislocations that we've seen won't happen anymore when we go on those rails. So, going back to this whole GameStop debacle, as I've learned more, and as you probably know now too, a lot of this has to do with the arcane way in which stocks are settled. And what I learned was we used to have a T+3, after the trading day, 3 days later is when you'd settle. And it was moving heaven and earth, crying and screaming to move companies to go to T+2. Well, if you're running a stable coin or, smart contracts on top of Ethereum, all of this next generation infrastructure, this is T+0, right? You're settling things in a nanosecond. And that's really good for everybody.
In addition to Bitcoin, which coins, if you will, cryptocurrencies, digital assets, are you a holder of? Are you a believer in?
I am building a fairly sizable portfolio of what are called NFTs, non-fungible tokens, some digital art, some virtual trading cards. And these may sound crazy to some, but I do think that that's the next frontier of digital currency and digital assets. And so I have been building a portfolio. My decision is the team and I will announce it. We will publicize everything we own, and we will make our holdings transparent so that folks can track along and see as we buy and sell things. So that's coming in a few months. I'm not really ready to show the details of exactly what we hold yet, but I'm really excited. Maybe in a few weeks, actually, but I'm very excited. We're almost ready to tell the world. I think it took people, look, I bought Tesla in 2014 or 15. I was one of the largest owners of the convertible debt. I felt that was the best margin of safety way to bet on Tesla. It's turned out to be an enormous winner. And I really believe in what Elon is doing. I think he's the most important entrepreneur of our lifetime. It's taken people 15 years to embrace that they're going to be now a legitimate car company. But when I underwrote the investment, my bet was on something bigger. And I think that Elon is well past building a car company. And I think it'll take another 5 or 10 years for people to figure out what this next arc of innovation is. And what that is the deregulation of energy. If you look under the hood, utilities spend tens of billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars a year all around the world on capex. They are completely regulated. They feel completely safe. They feel like they can issue debt ad nauseum. They can cause all kinds of damage to the environment or otherwise, look at PG&E and still come away unscathed because they're protected. Except that something is happening that nobody forecasted, which is the complete bottoms-up disruption of energy. And that's the only way that this thing is going to get deregulated. It's not going to be by law or dictate. It's not going to be, a big monolithic competitor. It's going to be because every home installs hydro panels, solar panels, batteries, and then software that basically allows them to live off the grid. And then eventually pump their excess energy into battery solutions and other things that are controlled by cities and towns and governments, who then in turn will turn off their usage of peakers at a minimum. And then over time, will have very different characteristics of usage from traditional utilities. That is what Tesla is powering. That is what allows it to be a multi-trillion-dollar company. I think that companies like Facebook and Google will be subject to much stricter laws. Section 230 will change and recognize them as quasi-publishers. And I say quasi because this is where, again, laws and politicians' understanding of the economy is still too brittle. But if they can bring the right people to teach them what an algorithm is and what machine learning and what weights are and how these things operate, what they'll see is a mechanized publisher. And there should be rules for mechanized publishers that are different from being a dumb pipe. So I think that that's going to happen. And then, for Microsoft, Apple, and Amazon, I don't think that much is going to happen. And the reason is because I think that those guys are generally on the right side of history. And they generally don't err towards the type of hot button issues that politicians care about. Like Facebook and Google threaten the institutionalized structures of power and influence that codify politics. Amazon Prime doesn't do that. Getting toothpaste, the next day, it's just not that disruptive. So, the laws will affect the folks that, threaten to disrupt politicians first and foremost.
And you think politicians can meet that threat with regulation, as opposed to, in Facebook's case, forcing the company to divest of, say, Instagram or WhatsApp?
Well, can they? I'm not sure that they can. Will they? Yes. And I think that, look, when you look at Mark's stated strategy, Zuck's stated strategy, if I had to, again, do a one-pager for that laboriously long thing that he wrote, it's basically what he said was, I am going to take all these products, I'm going to entangle them together so that institutionally this code base is monolithic. Now, this is an engineer speaking to you. Such that if any sort of, carve-outs or divestitures were to come to pass, it would take years for us to disentangle this mess, which are many more years where I can bet on the laws changing, the government changing, or their minds changing. So I think from a business strategy perspective, it was both obvious and brilliant. But I don't think it was seen for what it was by politicians.
You think Warren is generally right?
No, I think Mark's right. Like,
okay, Mark.
But as a general statement, like the general statement, which is true, is that we all tend to be dismissive or negative of things we don't fundamentally understand. And I think it's reasonable for a guy who's made $50–60 billion by owning things like Coca-Cola and Gillette to not understand Bitcoin. And forget like the last 13 years of tech as well, which he's also completely ignored. But he's allowed to do that, and he's very successful in his own right. Just like I don't know why I would buy Coca-Cola or Gillette. It just makes no sense to me.
Sure, but
So I'm just as crazy as he is. Sure. My point is, there are lots of ways to make money, and this is actually a really good point. So we have to be respectful of many ways of making money if making money is the goal. I've said that, for me, again, this platform I want to use as a way to drive change in areas that I think are fundamentally broken. And money is my tool for change. So money is a necessary evil. So when I think about doing things, I have to think about it from a broad investing mindset of, can I generate returns? Because if I do, I can take this money and do something really awesome with it. I can fund Alzheimer's research. I can do something over here in education, whatever. So, as an example, like he can go and he can basically own these great CPG names and other things and make money for his investors. That's great. But I think Mark Andreessen can go and invest in Oculus Rift and Box and make money. And so can I. And I think that's all fine.